Today on the LA Food Podcast, I'm your host Lucas Servodio, growing increasingly concerned about a high-stakes performance that not only didn't live up to expectations, but may have irreversibly altered the future of our democracy. I'm talking, of course, about Season 3 of The Bear, which dropped last Wednesday on FX and Hulu. Father Sal and I have been anxiously awaiting the show's return, so we made sure to binge it for you, dear listener, and provide you with the ultimate companion podcast. Today, we'll be covering the first half of the season, and on Friday, we'll cover the rest. So far, reviews have been mixed, to say the least. Are people overreacting? Have we been spoiled by two of the best seasons of television in recent history? Or are there legitimate concerns about whether Chris Storer and co. have jumped the proverbial shark and gone full Ted Lasso, so to speak? Listen to find out, because without further ado, let's chow down. Dear listener, I made a deal with my wife. She let me start a food podcast and eat ungodly amounts of noodles, pizza, sandwiches, and more under two conditions. One is that I never utter her name. The other is that I find ways to be healthy outside of my work in food. Being the fantastic partner I am, I found a few ways to up my health game. I exercise almost every day, I try to sneak in salads for lunch whenever I can, and I only ever snack on healthy foods. The macadamia nut has become an essential part of my daily routine with the best omega-6 to 3 ratios in the nut game, 8 times better than pistachios and 20 times better than cashews. At houseofmacadamias.com, they've got a bunch of different macadamia products that you can enjoy, like savory and sweet snack packs and chocolate-covered snack bars. One of the problems with macadamias I've found is that they can be expensive, but I'm solving this for you, dear listener, because as of today, all you've got to do is head to houseofmacadamias.com and use code LAFOOD to get a 10% discount on a healthy snack that also happens to be delicious. So what are you waiting for? Head to www.houseofmacadamias.com/discount/LAFood and go nuts. Welcoming back to the podcast, a man whose backpack is traversing the greater Los Angeles area as we speak in the back of a lift. It's Father Sal. Father Sal, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing well. This is a hectic day. My backpack decided to move to LA before I could. So it's having a good time down there while I am back in Seattle, unfortunately.
It's so classic you. How could you possibly forget your backpack?
Man, this is not classic me. I'm gonna be honest. I traveling especially, I am so on top of it. I was flying out of Burbank, and Burbank, which is the easiest airport ever, was somehow completely backed up. Like I had to get out before the airport because it was so backed up and like walk in. And I was just in such a rush that I think I just and I had my headphones in. I got to stop listening to podcasts all the time. And I just zoned out, grabbed my bag, and was running to the airport. First of all, it turns out my flight was delayed 5 hours. And then second of all, my backpack was in the back of the lift I had just left.
The sad part is I virtually guarantee you were not listening to the LA Food Podcast.
I sadly was not. I'm sorry.
Well, look, we are not here to discuss Father Sal's many flaws today. What we are here to discuss is The Bear, which just dropped Season 3 on FX last week. Father Sal and I have been binging. Father Sal, I believe, has watched the entire show. I myself stopped myself after 5 episodes for this part 1 recap. My first question is for you, Sal. How's your emotional state after binging the entire show, what I assume is more than once at this point?
Oh, yeah. I think I've basically watched it twice, but in some episodes on my rewatch, I've kind of skimmed ahead. No, my emotional state is good. It's undisturbed, and I will say somewhat disappointed, but we will get into the details of that. Yeah, no, I think a very different experience with The Bear this year. How about you?
I'm only 5 episodes in, so, I still have hope. I still think things can turn around. We will get to exactly how we're feeling about this season so far, but we kind of gave you a spoiler there, dear listener. Things are a little rocky in this fictional section of Chicago. So let's get right into it, okay? Can you give our listeners a reminder of where things ended in season two?
Yeah, so we ended season 2 on the Bears' first service for family service, and watched our favorite characters kind of navigate this first day of working together in the restaurant, punctuated most importantly by Carmi getting locked in the walk-in freezer or fridge, walk-in fridge, I think,
Yeah.
which leads to this the key conflicts that set up season 3. One being Carmi and Richie kind of yelling at each other, hitting a breaking point where they say some really cruel. Well, specifically, Carmi says some really cruel things to Richie, and of course, Claire overhears Carmi essentially calling his relationship with her a waste of time because Carmi believes that nothing feels worse than having let the restaurant down as he did, and his relationship with Claire is a waste of time, crucially saying the words, "I don't require amusement or entertainment, and I don't need to provide amusement and entertainment," which I think is a really key idea here for Carmi's character in season 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, can you also remind us the critical reception that season two received?
I mean, from everyone, including the podcast here, most importantly, we called it the best show of last year. I think it was roundly regarded by the Golden Globes and the Emmys. Jeremy Allen White and Iowa DeBeery had huge years in their own right. It was the darling of 2023. It was already had strong acclaim from season 1. I think everyone recognized the quality of the show there, but season 2, I think, really blew the bear up for good reason. It was truly some of the best television I'd seen in a long time. The episode of Forks with Richie and his character arc kind of healing was one of the best things I'd seen last year. Fishes, of course, an amazing moment of kind of stunt casting, but also a really compelling and frenetic episode of television. Again, just the likes of which you don't typically see. The Bear was, I think, at the top of the TV mountain last year.
Yeah. And the trailer for season three drops about a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
The hype around the show is huge, right? I think more so than leading up to any of the seasons before. The advertising was very much in your face. There was a lot of experiential marketing too. Like, I don't know, LA is like plastered with billboards. I assume Seattle is the same. We had some thoughts when the trailer came out. There was some indications that there could be a shift with how the season was approached. Can you also remind our listeners what we said when the trailer dropped, or I should say, what you said when the trailer dropped?
Sure, and I want to hear your recap of this as well. But I think my watching the trailer, which again at the time I emphasized that trailers are lies and you can't trust them. Although I don't know, man, I feel like some of my impressions were kind of prescient, which is one, I was afraid of inconsistent character behavior leading to contrived conflict dynamics. And then additionally, I was like, I'm afraid it's a little corny and that they're going to take their eye off the ball about what made the show good and sort of get into the Ted Lasso trap where you're kind of basically lost in your own sauce.
Yeah.
A little bit, and losing sight of the pace and propulsion and character that led the show to where it was. That was coming off the trailer. And I think I was overly concerned in some ways, but I also think there were some elements of that kind of observation that were correct. Did you have a similar response at the time?
I just remember thinking like you can't really tell much from a trailer in general. And I think only fools over index on trailers, as a certain someone on this podcast did ahead of our fantasy Top Chef draft. I will say that friend of the pod, Daniel Wargo, took great exception to you calling it the Ted Lassification, basically, or being concerned about the Ted Lassification. I think we need to better explain like what we mean when we say that. It's not that like Ted Lasso was out and out a bad show necessarily. I think what you mean by that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that season 1 was such a hit and had such a heart to it, basically, that when it came to the following seasons, the writers seemed to just want to give viewers like an almost like dialed up, ramped up version of what they were already expecting. And it led to like watered down storytelling and frankly, a lot of cringe.
Yeah, it was essentially, I think, turned into seeking out what they thought would be big audience moments, but at the expense of actually building to and earning those moments well, because they were either a source of kind of like weird and inconsistent character behavior, or frankly, look, Ted Lasso was a good show season one. I just fully believe it. Seasons 2 and 3 are not a good show. I think Ted Lasso really. Sorry, Daniel. It was not. It was not a good show. Season 3 was a bad show, and it was because, in large part, I think they also, frankly, just lost what they didn't really know what they wanted to say anymore. I think they had an overall sort of arc for what the team was going to achieve, but I think they didn't know what they wanted to do with the characters, and they almost also like a homework assignment. You have to go to every single character, and they have to have their moment and do their therapy and evolution, and to the point where you're like, what is this? And I think it's a little bit different from what happened this season of The Bear, or so far, I should say, this season of The Bear. And remember, something else I should mention from the trailer, the watching of the trailer, is that we anticipated generally that it was going to be a quote-unquote down season. Not necessarily in terms of quality, but the point we made was you can't do season 2 all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The moments and episodes in season 2 were earned by the groundwork season 1 and the many character moments and the quiet ways we learned about them, then sort of all climaxed in these key moments and episodes that helped us either understand better who the characters were, paid off in a major character transformation, or paid off for the plot, right? And so the expectation was, hey, season 3 is going to have to rebuild in some ways. We have to reset, and that's reasonable. And there's ways to do that well. And I think there are some ways that they've been doing it well in these first 5 episodes, and some ways that are a little concerning.
All right. We've teed it up enough. Let's get into the episodes, okay? As a reminder, dear listener, we're doing episodes 1 through 5 today, and then we'll do the rest of the season and our sort of overall thoughts as well on Friday's episode. Episode 1 is called Tomorrow, and it picks up immediately after where we left the crew at the season 2 finale, which you just elucidated. It starts right after the Bears opening night, and we see Carmy back in his apartment. We sort of gather that he's unable to sleep after all the quote unquote excitement. We see him head right back to the Bear, and we see him do 2 things. He starts cooking, and he starts writing what we later discover is this list of non-negotiables. We also see him throughout the episode make amends with Sydney for basically ditching them on their friends and family night. And also he calls Richie to make amends as well, telling him he still loves him. Really, though, the episode is a series of vignettes that take us back through the various phases of Carmy's career and the moments that led him to where he is today, and also the dishes that he's recreating in the kitchen. There's cooking with Daniel Boulud at Danielle in New York. There's cooking at Noma. There's cooking at Olivia Colman's restaurant with Will Poulter over in Chicago. And then there's cooking with Joel McHale, who plays the abusive chef. So, first question for you is, what did you think of the choice to pick up season 3 literally exactly right where season 2 left off? It's not something we had predicted.
I really appreciate it. Also, actually, did we not predict it? Because when you wrote your spec script, I think it was the following morning. I might be incorrect. No, I really loved it because I want to know what happened as a result of the fallout of that night. And I think they had to. You couldn't go like skip 3 months ahead and yada yada, however that situation was resolved. I wanted to know exactly how the characters were talking to each other and thinking about each other after the finale of season 2. So no, I like that a lot.
My spec script, I believe, started long after. Like, I think it started months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I had predicted it starting later on than like literally the next day. I personally didn't mind this. I was just a little surprised by it. You know, I was a little surprised that like no time at all had passed. Just because I thought like maybe we would start the season seeing a little bit about how sort of the Bears' journey had progressed. That said, that isn't really what I found jarring about this episode. What I found jarring is that the Bears sort of known as this like really loud, frenetic show. It always starts, from what I can recall at least, with like a really fast pace and like loud and like, you know, anxiety inducing. And this was literally silent for the start. I want to say like the first minute of the show is entirely like silent frames. And I found it overall to be a very subdued episode tone wise. What did you make of that?
I really liked it. I really liked this choice because, well, first of all, the tone to me is not what stood out most about the episode, but is critical to the episode. Yes, the quieter start after we've left off on this loud, frenetic, chaotic fracture of a finale, I thought it made total sense to say, here's the setting for the season. And it's critical because, first of all, when I started watching this episode 1, I texted you, like, let's delete the trailer episode because this is great. And I truly, it's one of my favorite episodes of this first half of the season because it was like, it was the ultimate show, not tell storytelling device. Carmi's head is exactly the place I wanted to start off the episode. I think I didn't realize that, but in terms of we leave Carmi in a moment of great shame and guilt. And what I think this episode does, with its quieter tone and with its myriad flashbacks, is kind of explain to us in more detail who Carmi is and how he got here today, and how he experiences restaurants. And I think this is a critical table setting for his character this season, and I really like that.
I think it really elucidates the major problem I have with a lot of this season so far. And it feels like at a certain stage in a show's life cycle, especially on this network FX, it feels like every show wants to be Atlanta. And I think that it's like interesting that the executive producer is Hiro Murai, who is obviously the Atlanta guy. But I think what Atlanta was like, became famous for eventually were these episodes that were sort of like unique, not necessarily story engines, but almost just like one-offs that were very artsy and very good, frankly. And I've seen other shows on FX try to replicate this as well, namely Dave. And this is what I got from this episode. It was almost just like an episode that was pure art in a way. Yes, it was definitely like trying to show some of Carmi's background in a way that, you could argue helps the story. But to me, it just felt a little bit indulgent, and it got me a little bit worried that we were going to see more of that as the season progresses.
I think we are describing the two poles of reaction to this episode. I mean, actually, I don't even know. I feel like what I've heard more is people with your response than mine. I disagree. And an episode doesn't always need to serve stories. It does eventually, which we'll also get into, to serve character, right? And yes, while we've spent a little bit of time in Carmi's past before, I it's just better understanding, I think, who he is and how he came to be in a more full way, and also how he feels. There are really interesting moments of Carmi before he had met Joel DeCale's abusive chef, of kind of getting aggressive in the kitchen, and Olivia Colman being like, "Quiet, please," and just like they're little like just moments, kind of unlocking who he is and where he came from. Now, a little bit indulgent, maybe that might be the word I use, a little indulgent, and I didn't identify this at the time, but I think something that you could look back on this episode and through the first 5 and frankly the season and say, maybe leaning a little bit too heavily on stunt cameos, some stunt casting. Like, it's cool. It's very cool to see Renee Redzepi in a Bear episode. It's cool to see Daniel Boulud. I think something that we'll find as we get through these first 5 episodes is just because you can get the famous guy, does it mean you need to go get the famous guy? Do we have to do that? So I didn't feel that when I watched it. I truly did like this episode a lot. I was so psyched watching it.
Couple quick things I wanted to mention about this episode, though. One, did you know that Maddie Matheson got a story by credit?
Yeah, I saw that. Maddie Matheson really up in his role here across the Bear, it seems, both on screen and off.
We're going to get to that, but there's a lot more facts in this season than we perhaps bargained for, and we'll talk about whether that's a good thing or not. Another quick thing about this episode, Daniel Boulud is one of the sort of cameos that you mentioned, right? One thing is there's no way he's still cooking, like he's showing, Carmi how to like make some of the dishes. There's absolutely no way he is actually spending time in the kitchen. That took me out of it for a moment.
Sure. Yeah, fair.
Other thing, they spelled radicchio wrong when Carmi is like in the walk-in fridge. It has 1D, 2 C's for all my friends at the Bear who want to know how to spell radicchio. And then, the last thing I had was about the score, the Trent Reznor score, and how it just made it feel the episode overall very repetitive, despite it being very beautiful. But that's okay. You can disagree on that.
Score was beautiful. Also, Radicchio I think the Radicchio thing is a choice. It's at the end of season 2, they showed Radicchio spelled incorrectly as Carmi's in the fridge and realizes that he's put his eye off the ball. I think that's what that's intended to show. Carmi's looking at the shittily ripped tape, the misspelling Radicchio, Also, Carmi can't spell very well. They talk about that. We're about to get into that in season two. So I think that's consistent. We'll have more to say about the soundtrack of this season as we go along here as well.
Oh shit. Okay, I didn't realize you were such a music file. Okay. Episode 2 is called Next, and we pick up right where episode 1 ended. I'm pretty sure. Actually, I found the timing a little hard to track.
Yeah, I agree on timing being hard to track. I actually read this as a couple days after, like maybe like a weekend, or like it's Thursday after after a couple, because we see Uncle Jimmy note new earthenware and a new cryovac, which I assume didn't happen the day after. I think it may be a couple days in between.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually, because that in episode 1 we do see Carmi apologize to Sydney in the kitchen,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
then we see Sydney come back to the kitchen. But
Yeah.
overall time I did find hard to track. But in this one, it basically starts with Carmi in the kitchen with an entire sort of array of entirely new dishes that he's created, and he's also got this printed out list of the non-negotiables. The bulk of the episode is the team coming back to work and stumbling upon what Carmi has created and getting into a fight with him in the kitchen around these things. It's mostly centered around Carmi and Richie fighting, and it being very clear that they have not resolved the issues from the end of season 2. But you also get some, to a lesser extent, a more muted fight between Carmi and Sydney, specifically over the non-negotiables and the decision to change the menu every day. The episode ends when Marcus comes in for the first time since his mother's passing, which seems to quiet the quarreling crew down and sort of like inspire everybody to get back to work. So, what did you think about this episode? I read some people saying that this felt like the real episode 1 of season 3.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. I would call episode 1, like, again, the table setting, and moose bouche maybe, and this is kind of when we get back into the story, right? It's a bottle episode. We spend the entire episode in the kitchen of the bear. I kind of maybe cynically read it as we spent all of our budget going to Denmark and hanging out with Daniel Boulud, and now we need to just chill out in this kitchen for a day. I actually like this episode a little bit more on a rewatch. This episode, when I watched it the first time, this is when I first started feeling some of my concerns from the trailer. Like I said, loved episode 1. And by the way, as we essentially see Carmi, as we could kind of tell from the trailer, withdraw, right? After he insults and breaks Claire's heart, right? And has left his restaurant to fend for itself, its opening night. What he does is, and why episode 1 is so important, is it shoots him back into his past, where the anal and intensity and execution above all else is where he's going to find solace, right? When in pain. And particularly, I think the experience he had at Joel McHale's restaurant, which is where he also learned of Michael's death, as we see in season 1. And I think he kind of is like withdrawing into that place at the expense of the people around him. He's doing it purportedly to not leave Sydney alone ever again, but really it's a selfish act, as he exerts extreme control over the restaurant and essentially lets the trauma and history that's kind of haunted him, intentional word use there, take over what the bear was.
Well, I'd say it is interesting that you say the thing about Carmi being selfish and doing it for himself, because I feel like this episode kind of gave us mixed messages.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you had Sid sort of like call him out on that. So she says, you've somehow miraculously made this entirely about yourself.
Yes.
But then at the end, when you have Marcus come in and they have like the tender moment between Carmi and Marcus at the end, Marcus asks him, hey, chef, can you do one thing for me? And Carmi's like, yeah, whatever you need. And Marcus asks him, can you take us there? Which honestly, I thought was cheesy as all fuck. But what he meant was like, can you take us to like the promised land of like, the star and sort of like success as a restaurant? And so that sort of like gives Carmi the permission of like, I'm not just doing this for me, I'm doing this for the team.
Yeah, well, you're right that the team is in different places here. And what's so interesting is actually that interaction between Carmi and Marcus is my favorite of the whole episode, because it gives us an interesting idea. Of course, what is Marcus experiencing? His own pain and trauma. And what is Marcus doing? He's using the restaurant same way Carmi does and did, to escape pain and trauma, right? Mm. And I think one of the ideas we're getting is this may not be the healthiest way to do that. Now, I don't think they suggest what Marcus is doing isn't entirely unhealthy, but he and Carmi have this moment of connection where he's kind of like, I get why you I need to be here. I get why you throw yourself into it in this way. Take us there. But it's coming from a place of pain, not necessarily of nurturing, right? And I thought that's a really interesting dynamic.
So you mentioned that you felt like this episode had some flaws. What were they to you?
So some of it was dialogue and dialogue corniness. The most important one, which for the record, I was like, okay, this is where we're at right now. Maybe they'll change it as we go along here in these first couple episodes. Was what I felt to be a little bit of contrived dynamic, particularly I'd say between Carmi and Richie. And now look, of course, they had this terrible moment where they're like yelling at each other and saying terrible things. The tension I felt was, okay, when we've seen Richie grow a lot, and we know that Carmi and Richie are the only people, like they've experienced Michael's death together. Richie nearly killed a guy. Carmi was the only one there to pick him up from prison. A yelling match when they've had a million yelling matches, then leading to this great schism. I'm not like, sure, today, a couple days later, sure, let's see how that plays out. Additionally, if Carmi seeks greatness in all these neurotic ways, and I should say for the record, the non-negotiables in our trailer, I was like, seem reasonable. Like, yeah, like let's be great. Let's try to push the boundaries. They're neurotic and anal and overbearing. I don't see how Carmi goes, we're going to go get a star. We're going to be the greatest functioning restaurant ever. Also, front of house, back of house, don't want to talk, whatever, that's fine. Like, that's not, like, there'd be more of a, I think, it's just not where I thought these characters were, is what I'll say. Yeah. Like, of course, they're at odds. But it's not clear to me why there wouldn't be a breakthrough in some way in terms of them talking. Why would Richie not even, like, accept Carmi's apology, which was like a really heartfelt apology, I thought.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the writer's trying to force an arc on us for the rest of the season, right? Like, we need to start from a shitty place so that we can, like, fix it over the course of the season.
Right, yeah. You essentially, yeah, you're right. And not even an arc, but like a scenario, like an issue.
Yeah.
Here's an issue now. We've decided that these guys would have this issue for this long, and it would be this intense. And I was like, I don't know if he didn't fuck Carmi didn't fuck Richie's ex-wife. Like, when we, like, it's not like it's just the argument in like an incredibly heated moment that they both know is a heated moment.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I do have to say, I do get confused about like what is a low blow. Because like even during this fight at one point, like Richie makes a comment about Claire and then everyone is like, oh, that's a low blow. It's like,
right.
Insult each other about everything all the time. It feels like that was totally like within limits. So yeah, it's an interesting sort of set of rules that they're operating with.
100%. Also, like, so if I look back on that argument at the end of season 2, first of all, Richie starts off the insults by calling Carmi Donna in that conversation, right? Which sets them both off. I would say the things when I was trying to understand where Richie's at, I was like, okay, what I can understand most is Carmi saying that without him, Richie wouldn't even be able to pay for his daughter's life. That's pretty mean. Pretty rough.
Yeah.
And then like that Richie's obsessed with his family. Meanwhile, Richie's yelling back, I love you. And so we get to this point here in this episode where they're like so far apart. And Richie in particular is so hurt that like they can't overcome it for whatever reason. So I'm like, okay, I guess saying that about you as a father would be the thing that sets you off that way. However, we also know that Io's character, Sydney, has called Richie a fucking loser and that his daughter didn't respect him in season 1. They were good by the next day, and he doesn't even know Sydney like that. So why? I mean, again, it's not the first time we've heard people really get at Richie and see Richie like then forgive them.
Yeah.
And I'm like a little unclear why it would, extend this far after a legitimate apology. It's not like Carmi's dropped the ball entirely with Richie the way he has with Claire.
Yeah. So that's episode 2, and I think we can both agree that there's some growing pains in terms of growing into the season, that are starting to show. Episode 3 is called Doors, and I think it's where they try to get back to what makes The Bear great, in my opinion, which is showing us behind the curtain of a restaurant's operations and sort of like showing us like the real of how a restaurant works. And this episode runs through the ups and downs of a month of service at The Bear. And in every season so far, there's been an episode that sort of just happens at a frenetic pace. There's obviously that really famous episode in season 1 where it's all one camera shot, and season 2 there's episodes like that too. I mean, famously, Fishes
Yeah.
builds up to quite the explosive ending. This episode felt like that in terms of pace, if not drama, just in terms of it being so fast, bang, 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 action, action, action. Things we continue to see. We continue to see tensions between Carmi and Richie. Those are not resolved. If anything, front of house and back of house, that tension is very much posing a problem for the restaurant. We're also learning that the restaurant is losing money at an alarming clip. Basically, like we see Sugar in the back doing the books and talking to Cicero about how they are not doing well, that they need to do something in order to change the economics. And we also get a sense that the pressure on Carmi is building in an unhealthy way. As I said, some welcome this episode as the episode that the season really got going or really got back to what makes it such a great show. What do you think of that?
I disagree because I thought episode 1 was great, but I do see this episode as one of the best of the season. A lot of parallels between episode 1 and episode 3, by the way. Both are primarily montages to tell a storytelling over a broad range of time, and again, it was for the most part show not tell, as montages are, where we are seeing and feeling the dynamics, between Richie and Carmi grow in intensity and pain. Between Carmi and Sydney, I think most sort of nuanced. I mean, like, it's not all nuanced, but we can see how they are growing apart as partners. I also thought it was really interesting to tell the story of a restaurant operating in this way, in this fast-paced, over a month, because you can imagine when you get into it, the days blend together, and it's almost like, look, and we are not having a good time in the Bear right now, right? It seems like the food is high quality, that we spend relatively little time with actual patrons and seeing the food go out, but we are not having a good time in the kitchen. And the last thing I'll say is what you mentioned the restaurant losing money despite its potential excellence. And it's not because they're not doing well. It's because Carmi is essentially self-harming through this process, not just himself, but the restaurant, because the reason they're losing money is because he's changing the menu every day and buying the most important shit, like the best produce, which is at a wasteful level.
Yeah.
For the reason only of holding himself to these insane standards that he learned about at Noma and at Joel McHale's restaurant. But to what avail? Like, it's leading to his own restaurant's pain in a lot of ways.
I mean, that's why I really appreciated this episode, and I think I appreciated episode 5 even more, which we'll get to, is it showed you sort of like the behind the scenes in a real tangible way. I do have to say, can you think of any restaurant that changes its menu every single day?
It's a good question. I was like, does Noma do that? I haven't been to Noma. I assume they exist, but it's like a 1 Michelin star restaurant doesn't do that. you don't need that for a Michelin star necessarily at all. And I actually do remember having that impression. I'm like, is this really the standard for getting a star? I don't think it is.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think going back to episode 2, that's what Richie says. He says it sounds a lot like running away, changing the menu every day, and there's definitely an element to that. Yeah, no, I liked this episode personally. I thought it was fine. I have to say, I thought it was more appropriate to have an episode with so many montages here as opposed to episode 1. This is another overarching problem I'm having with this season. I think every single episode in a really good show needs to exist in 2 ways, in my opinion. It needs to, one, exist as a self-contained universe, like a story within the episode, and it needs to serve to move the overall plot of the season forward. And I think that's something that, for example, that Succession does really well. Like, every single episode is like its own play, right? Like there's a clear objective that's happening in an episode, and in sometimes bigger ways and in sometimes smaller ways, the episode is moving the overarching story of the season forward, whether it's like the bear hug in season 2, whether it's whatever, right? But with this season of The Bear, I'm finding that I'm struggling to see how the episodes are doing both. Sometimes I think they're doing one or either in too strong a way. However, this episode I think was the right balance. I feel like it's a montage is appropriate for episode 3, where you're trying to show like what is happening within the story, like right now before sort of the big cataclysmic event. And I feel like, to me, this worked. It didn't work as the opening image of the entire season in episode 1, but it worked for me here. And I feel like that's a difficult balance to strike. This one struck it well for me.
Interesting. I think I disagree with you on the fundamental on that framing, but in a small way. And what a TV episode needs to do, yes, it needs to be able to. I think it needs to be a good story. I don't necessarily think it needs to move plot forward. I think it's okay when you have 10 hours of television to spend time on character. And it's funny you use the example of Succession because, and I mean, ultimately Succession is a show where I think plot matters very little, but character matters a lot. It's a show driven by character. However, I think you've put your finger on something which is the tweak I'd make that I think is accurate, is there needs to be something of consequence that happens in each episode, right? Something that either about character or about plot, or just as a thing that like, oh, this matters. This matters that this happened here. Should happen in each episode. I do think that has happened basically to some extent, episodes 1, 2, and 3 of The Bear in some way so far. And I do agree that, like I said, this is one of my favorite episodes that we've seen thus far in the season. I do feel like we start losing that impact and that here's why what we are telling you matters.
Yeah.
Here's the relevance of what's happening right now in each of these episodes, not to skip ahead. But overall, I would agree that this is an episode that was used well, right? And that fit in kind of at the perfect time of the season and told a story that I was like, okay, I see where we're going.
Yeah.
I like, this is an interesting, and also it reinforces some of the tensions that whether like that may or like that felt a little contrived in episode 2, when we see the day-to-day of Carmy and Richie and like their tension, and they have this great shot, right, of them in the kitchen and the front of house kind of look at each other on like dark and like, how to show their split. So they reinforce that stuff in a way where I can see it. Yeah, just one of the stronger ones felt very much like The Bear.
What did you think of the food that they're serving? Because obviously, like season 1, season 2, we saw a taste of it at friends and family night, and it looked really exciting, right? It looked like it's almost like modern take of a lot of Italian American stuff. What do you think of the food they've presented thus far?
So I actually noticed this, I think, in episode 2 first, where via his subtracting of food in the dishes, it looks good, but it looks soulless, right? It's like a Top Chef feedback, right? Like in when they serve the family and friends meal with the T-bone steak on the plate, and like each dish has a home in terms of the story, like in terms of themselves, right? They saw, I think, Carmy was using food in season 2 to process trauma. He's retaking the cannoli, and it has like, it's compelling and has meaning and feeling. All these dishes are just like fine dining, like the robotic, pristine, but like less connected, running away, right? Yeah. He used to use food to run to and process trauma alongside Claire and Sydney, and now he's using it to run away. Yeah, it doesn't have the same feeling, and it feels more boring from a food perspective. Yeah, for them, which is obviously intentional.
And interestingly, like I remember in episode 2 when he's talking about, or I forget which episode, but they ask him why change the menu all the time, and he's like, to show them what we can do, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like they really wanted us to focus on the them.
Yeah.
Because Sydney asks like, and who is them, right? But I actually think the more interesting part of that sentence is what we can do. And I think that like actually like these dishes are trying to showcase technique.
Right.
And they really want to showcase like the skills that the chef has in their arsenal. That is where the soul is like getting lost. Like you're just trying to like basically show them how fancy you can get with the techniques, as opposed to what like telling a story via your dish.
Yeah.
And to me, that may be like a journey that I haven't seen the rest of the season. You have, but if I were to like plot a journey of where Carmy needs to go, it's almost like rediscovering that in his cooking.
One of the non-negotiables: technique, misspelled all 3 times. I also will say, first of all, what this episode showed me again, additionally, was Richie's quality as a leader, right?
Oh yeah.
Richie being much more self-actualized than Carmi over here. Richie's non-negotiables, I think, being the ones that got the bear to where it was at the end of season 2, and that menu and the process they'd all gone through for healing, like joy just in general, putting the customer first. Oh, huge, an interesting part of this too, right? They're not like Carmi's not even cooking for the customer necessarily, right? He's cooking for the them, the unnamed invisible them. Whether it's and he does that doesn't even necessarily mean critics. It speaks. I think it's for like the voice of Joel McHale in his head or something, that the traumatic experience he had. So anyway, we don't even see how customers are responding to the Bear RX experience versus at the finale of season 2, we saw people being like, wow, this is cool, this is great, or blah blah blah, right? I think that's a really interesting choice because this even we, I feel like in this episode, just like episode 1, have not really left Carmi's head.
Yeah.
This is all like in Carmi's head as he figures out how to deal with his emotions in a poor way.
Yeah. No, the best part of this episode is definitely like seeing Richie shine, right? Like when he does bring the pinata out and starts
Yeah.
Feliz cumpleaños a ti, like that's it. Talks about the razzle dazzle and stuff, and that's the cool part. It is what he learned in his like stage over at Olivia Colman's restaurant, and it's cool to see that. You're right, he's the more self-actualized one. Well, look, going from an episode where it was mostly vibes and little story, we get to an episode 4, Violet, which is pretty much just designed to move the plot forward. What we see in this one, Sydney moves out of her dad's house, who has irritable bowel syndrome or something. And she also continues to dilly-dally on signing the DocuSign that would make her a partner in the restaurant. Richie meets up with Frank, the man who's going to be marrying his ex-wife. We also see Marcus sort of like rebuilding his life after his mom's passing. And we see him find inspiration for a dish in a violet that he stumbles upon on his way to work. And finally, we see Sugar worrying about having a child and how not to fuck said child up with your own trauma. This episode had one of my least favorite moments of the entire season so far. Can you guess what it was?
I actually went back and skimmed through the episode, and I don't know if I could guess. I'm not sure what it was.
It was the flashback of a conversation that Carmi and Claire had, in which Claire is describing this like ER patient that came in.
Oh yeah.
And I absolutely hated that. It was so cringe. Like literally the way the story ends is like this person has this traumatic injury and then they wake up and they're just laughing, you know? I found it so heavy-handed.
Yeah.
Like I found it so heavy-handed in terms of like trying to convey a theme. I think Molly Gordon, the actress who plays Claire, gets a lot of shit online for like being this like kind of like almost like caricature of kind of like the female lead in shows like this. And I don't think it's even her fault. I think the writing does not help her. They just make her sound like overly wistful and overly like cliched. And that moment was like, if I wasn't so married to this show, I could see myself stop watching right there.
This crucially, I think, was another indulgent moment. So this scene happens, I think, the first 5 minutes. First 5 minutes of this episode is this dark scene, like with like, by the way, a violet hue to it. That's the name of the episode to an extent, I think. And like it's Carmi and Claire talking, and you're hitting on a point which I think is critical and continues to be critical throughout the season. You will have said you felt it in episode 1, though I didn't. But I understand what you mean, which is these moments that are intended to either communicate a theme or show character or whatever it is, just go on like too long to the point where you're like, okay, I get it, bud. Like I get it. And this scene did not have to be 5 minutes long, to your very point. Like, and I agree this was kind of like flashing across. Wait, after spending a ton of time in the restaurants the prior 2 episodes, we are mostly outside of it now. It's not like Ted Lasso, but it's kind of like, all right, we got to check the Claire box and the Sydney box and the Marcus box and the Richie box, and we're going to go and do all these things in a way where I'm like, when you say this episode was just meant to move the plot forward, I think what you're identifying is it kind of just like okay, and what, okay, and so what? It's full getting the domino up, which is all right, I suppose, but it didn't feel coherent. It didn't feel like, oh, I have enough time to fully invest myself. in each of the scenarios that are happening.
Yeah, it's not an episode you're going to look back on and even remember as an episode. You're just going to remember that these things happened maybe over the course of the season, but they had very little to do with one another. And I think the most pivotal plot point of the episode happens at the end when we learn that the Tribune is working on a review because the photographer calls to schedule coming in, taking photos, which is typically sort of the last step after the reviewer has already come and dined in. From a story perspective, what that's doing is that is teeing the review up to drop. And I don't know this, I haven't seen the rest of the season, but I'm assuming it drops episode 6 or 7. And what that does is it sort of tees up the review as sort of like the central point of the season, like in terms of like what it means for the restaurant, positively or negatively. We'll see if I'm right. And I think that that's really interesting if that's the case, to sort of make the review the sort of like central point of the season. Let's say that was the choice. You know whether that's the choice or not because you've seen the rest of the season. But if that were the choice, what do you think of that?
I'm really glad you're sharing this prediction, and we should revisit it when we get to the second half of the season, because not just with the review, but I'd say there are a series of things that they are setting up for payoff later. You'd actually mentioned one before, which is, hey, Carmi retreating into these like more technique-y dishes. Might that be the arc we see him work through? We're going to get another plot point in the next episode, which, I mean, we're going to talk about. It's like when we learn Ever is closing. That was, I believe, this next episode 5, where you're like, oh, that was the point I had, where I was like, oh, this is going to be the thing that essentially unlocks a transformation or arc for our characters. Even small things like the setup of Marcus kind of dealing with his mother's death, and which we follow up on a little bit in this episode. What does that mean for his character this season? When he finds inspiration in a violet, his mom's favorite flower, I think he said. What does that mean for his arc? And so they're setting up these dominoes a little bit, and we should. I think it's a very reasonable prediction you've made. I think it would have made a lot of sense.
Okay. Interesting. Good to know how this is going to go. The other sort of tension that continues to build here is that Sydney really doesn't want to sign this DocuSign for whatever reason. That's going to give her part ownership in the bear.
Well, I mean, this is actually a good one. And I will say at this point of the season, and I guess, episode 4 and 5, you made a great point before where you're like, you'll barely remember this as an episode. And as soon as you said that, I started going back through the older episodes we've seen in The Bear, and always there's like a focus, right? Even when we are spending time with multiple characters, I think there's at least a story where you're like, this is kind of the story we're staying with. It's the A story of this episode, and here are the B, C, like D, whatever it may be. And you're exactly right where this one, like I said, feels like a non-episode because you don't know really who to focus on or what the point is. Sydney's, I say this because I feel like we should be spending much more time with Sydney. Now, it could be intentional that we don't, because in Carmi's mind, Carmi being the protagonist, Sydney's been sidelined. The reason why she hasn't signed the DocuSign is because she's not being treated like a partner, right? Why sign a partnership agreement when you are not a partner in the menu or the process of the restaurant that you help build? Now, I don't understand why, speaking of contrived dynamics, why Sydney hasn't confronted Carmi about this in a real way yet. Because what we've seen from the very first time we've basically met Sydney is that she's really willing to be like, put her foot down with Carmi. From the very first season, she's consistently been like, no, here's what the expectations are. Here's what I want. Now, I get Carmi's a little scary right now, but it's never been like Sydney, or Richie for that matter, to not confront Carmi. And so Sydney avoiding this DocuSign makes sense to me. What doesn't is her allowing this to continue with Carmi when she really has been on his case consistently throughout the show so far.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is like that it's almost like you bang your head against the wall enough times, you almost don't believe that that you can change things. So that's the only thing I can think of. She's almost like giving up on this thing that was her dream. I've seen some people characterize it as like she wanted to be a cook and she wanted to cook alongside this great chef Carmi, but she's realizing maybe she doesn't want to own. And I think actually the way you're characterizing it is a lot more fair. It's more like, do I want to be a partner in this thing where I'm not actually a partner?
Yeah.
Last episode we're discussing today, that is episode 5. It's called Children. And in some ways, the juiciest one. It begins with Sydney helping Marcus clean out his mom's place. The crux of the episode, however, is the staff at the Bear preparing to welcome the Tribune's photographer to the restaurant in light of the upcoming review. While Cicero, maybe my favorite thing that's happened this entire season,
Yeah.
bringing a guy called Computer in to suss out why the restaurant is bleeding money. The other sort of like biggest thing that happens in this episode from a plot perspective is that there is news that Olivia Colman's character has decided to shutter her restaurant ever. And it really strikes a chord with Richie, Sid, and Carby for various reasons. They're a little incredulous at the news and are kind of seen wondering what that might mean for their own restaurant, right? I think what makes The Bear so good is when it lifts a curtain and lets us peek into the operations of a restaurant. And this did that in such a compelling way with compelling characters, aka Computer, coming in and really dissecting every aspect of why the Bear was bleeding money. Everything from like charger plates to even having a pastry chef that only makes 2 dishes. Like obviously, like, you know, Sugar really fought him on that one. But it was a good point. Why do you have this person that's only making 2 dishes? You know, you kind of realize why a lot of restaurants don't invest in their pastry program as much.
I agree on that. This could just be us as audience members, but I agree that I really enjoyed that Cicero and Computer moment and getting into something that we've talked about that they will have to, I think, or are planning to address in the show, which is the financial precarity of restaurants. Now, the funny thing is this. It's obvious why they're losing money. And they go through all the things, and it's cool to see the charger plates and pastry chef decisions and etc. But it's like, yeah, you got a guy who's going freaking crazy and wasting so much time and money because of the way he thinks this has to go. There was a great point that Sydney made, I think, in this episode where she was tasting a dish of Carmi's, and she was like, my dad or something used to go to a steak place every day because he had like a favorite dish, right? And ate it every day. The front of house can't get its shit together and turn tables because they're learning a new menu every day. They're spending 20 grand on butter and they're going to farmers markets every day. It's very obvious why they're losing money, but I really did enjoy that tension being set up and hey, it's not just magic that fine dining happens. Like we have to look at the decisions we're making to figure out what's not just like creatively possible, but financially possible as we do it.
Yeah. What do you think we were supposed to gather as an audience from the closure of Olivia Colman's restaurant?
So this was the moment where I was like, so the season to this point has felt like an open wound. We're not having a good time. We had this schism in the finale of season 2, and the whole show to this point is about Carmi's trauma that led to this moment and the way it's unleashing itself on the people around him. And like I said, while the food may be great, it seems like it is, but we don't really know. We're not having a good time. And when I saw when I saw them present that, I was like, this seems like the thing that will bring us back to reality, right? And to begin to heal relationships, will kind of help Carmi snap out of it in a way, right? And kind of like reconsider, like shift his perspective. I think we see Carmi in this episode, correct me if I'm wrong, have the first moment of doubt, right? Mm-hmm. When he goes to help Ibra off the floor and he goes, hey, am I fucking this up?
Yeah.
Right? And when they did that, plus they did Ever Closing, I was like, okay, I feel like this is going to be the moment where we kind of turn from pain to healing a little bit in this story.
You could be right. I was a little worried that it was just a way for us to like sort of like gain steam around fear that this whole thing isn't going to work out.
Yeah.
And which would seem like a pretty like just a kind of naked story device, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, you've seen more of it than I have, so it's good to hear you hopeful. I will say this episode saw the biggest celebrity cameo of the season so far. Sorry, Josh Hartnett, who made a cameo in like episode 2 or 3. John Cena, former wrestler John Cena, came in as Sammy Fack related to the facts of Matty Matheson fame. What did you think about this?
This was pretty brutal. I thought this is like I like just because you can get John Cena doesn't mean you have to go get John Cena and spend as much time with him. Completely felt like he was on a completely different show. like what are we doing?
Yeah.
And then you haven't seen this, but I'm gonna like kind of like semi spoil something. This idea of haunts, right? The whole thing is like, oh, he's haunting you. Chelsea is haunting you, right? He's like whatever, blah blah blah. I'm just to give you a little heads up. That idea kind of sticks with the season, and it's a very again heavy-handed metaphor, right? Oh, like we're haunted by these by things that have happened to us in the past, blah blah blah. The amount of time they spent on this shit,
Yeah.
I was like, enough. We don't like when you get John Cena, you have to give John Cena a certain amount of screen time, and it was too freaking much. It was completely. I was sick of it by the end of the show. It was. I was like talking to Emily out loud, being like, "This is like embarrassing to watch." In some ways, like I completely did not hit for me.
Look, I'm a Cena fan. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Blockers.
Yeah.
Ike Barinholtz also has a great cameo, or a great role in that, I should say. He can be really funny. But yeah, he felt shoehorned in an uncomfortable way. And yeah, the haunting thing was getting very annoying by the end of it. And I'm very disappointed to hear that it continues. I also think, this episode was really fact heavy, and it may just be because you needed to give Cena more screen time. But in general, I think we've been seeing a lot more fact on screen. I was reading reviews, and honestly, it kind of resonated with me that like I don't know that I watched the show for this like Marx Brother routine that happens between the facts. Like it's not that funny. It's not that compelling. And I don't know that I need quite as much of it. I'm all for giving like expanding character roles. For example, I can see that that's happening with Tina.
Yep.
I haven't even seen the rest of the season, but I know that that's coming.
Yep.
But with the facts, it just feels gratuitous. It almost feels like Matty Matheson's famous now. Let's give him some more screen time.
100%. Like the fact routine is great 4 times a season.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're getting it at least once an episode right now, if not more. And it,
dude, the scene where where Carmi is like, pour the broth.
Oh yeah, and
he takes it to the table and pours the broth. I was like, literally as it was happening, and I saw him preparing to walk back, I was like, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Not because I was like worried about the character. I was like, that is just such a cheesy, corny joke.
Yeah, 100%. And exactly the kind of joke that when we saw the trailer, I was like, come on. Like you even know what he's gonna do before he does it.
Yeah.
It's an unrealistic way that people would like. We know Fack is silly, but he's also been shown to be competent in his own little ways when it comes to art. Like he's not a fucking idiot. He's not gonna walk the food bag, and you're like, come on, what is this? What is the point of this? Like they understand it's that, like again, we're having a bad time is kind of the point. Like we have an open wound kind of through the restaurant, so they want to balance it with this comedic sensibility. But I don't think you have to. Not like this, and it's not great.
Yeah. Okay, look, man, we've spent a lot of time talking about what is not working in the season so far. What do you think is working?
So I think, to be clear, there are character moments that hit in the way the Bear always has. I think the moment of Marcus and Sydney cleaning out his mom's place and then sitting together on the porch, I think that was really well done. I think Richie's dynamic with his that was a funny scene in a way. Richie meeting his wife's new husband, right? Like,
yeah, I like that.
It was good, right? Like there are episode 3. I think for the most part, the tension and montage of the kind of pain was good. I thought that was a good time. There are moments that cut through that are maybe not as successful, but there are the components here of what made the Bear a good show. 5 episodes in, even though at this point I texted you, hey, maybe we don't delete the trailer episode just yet because I think I see some flaws. At this point, I was like still having a baseline good time, and I think I do throughout the season. For the record, like the bones of what made the show good are there. There is this indulgence, there is this contrivedness, there is this corniness that we see starting to peek through, and
it's the Atlanta effect, bro. I'm telling you, it's like every show when it gets to this level of fame wants to be Atlanta, and unfortunately, not every show is.
No. What about you? What do you think is working?
I am not having a good time at all. I haven't seen the rest of the season, but I really looked forward to this.
Yeah.
And I also really looked forward to season 2, right?
Yeah.
And when I watched season 2, it really delivered. It was one of those experiences where you sit
Yeah.
down and every episode you just don't want it to end, right?
Yeah.
This one is really
Yeah.
dragging for me. It's really hard to get through in a way where like I also feel sad that it's over,
Hmm.
but more so because like I feel like I didn't get anything to begin with. So it's a tough one to watch. I'm not finding it entertaining. I'm finding it slow. The most like generous thing I can say is it may be
Yeah.
intentional. It may be
Yeah.
intentional that they want it to hurt as you watch. And in that sense, they're succeeding. But I do think that sometimes you can't tell if it's intentional or if it's just bad, right? And honestly, I can't wait to be done with it, not just because I'm not enjoying it. I hope to enjoy it. Let's be clear. I hope to enjoy the second half of the season. I think it can be turned around, honestly. But I can't wait to read the reviews because I do think that there are going to be people out there who just hate on it to hate on it
Yeah. Yeah.
because you always get that when a show is successful, right? But I do think that there's going to be some really, I think, meaty and valid and interesting critiques, right?
Oh, I was gonna say I'll send you a couple because there is. I think you named it. There is definitely the blowback sentiment that I think was always going to happen after a show is as successful as it is happening, but with legitimate, I think some from what we can see from the first 5 episodes, reasons for it. So I won't share any headlines or anything to give that away, but I'm going to send you a couple, I think, more leveled and fair critiques that are not just, it's bad or whatever.
I will say, I think the best part of the show remains
Mhm.
when we see behind the scenes of the restaurant, when we see the food, when we see like the cooking, when we see the environment in the
Yeah.
kitchen, all the things that made the bear great are still there. I just think it's being drowned out by other factors at the moment. But like the work that
Yeah.
like I'm like the culinary producer, like Courtney Storer and team are doing is still awesome. Like one of my favorite moments of the entire season was season 2 I'm sorry, episode 2. They did like opening
Yeah.
credits and showed like all the Chicago restaurants and like went around Chicago and like showed like
Yeah.
vignettes basically of those restaurants working and people dining at them, and that was awesome. That was really cool. I think that the story overall, it almost makes me think that if you're thinking about
Yeah.
4 seasons as an overall story,
Yeah.
there needs to be one that does a ton of work to move things forward
Yeah.
and maybe suffers as a result. And this might be it. The only thing that leaves me scratching my head is that I don't feel like a ton is happening.
Yeah. That I think is a great point, and a great headline for what we've seen so far in the show. One that you anticipated also when we watched the trailer, which is, to get the payoff moments, you need to build to them. And it really seems like they're taking their time to build, and as a result, not much is happening. And that means the build is somewhat of a failure, right? Like, things should still be happening. Things of import, things that make us care and invested, still need to be happening for the bigger moments that we saw in season 2 to pay off. My concern so far in this season is I'm not sure how well they're doing it in a way that makes sense, is consistent with characters, and makes us continually interested. I think in these first 5 episodes, as we've noted before, they've set up a couple interesting places, little interesting points. Ever closing, Marcus and his mom, and how he's dealing with the trauma. Io and the document. By the way, we did see Io meet Adam Shapiro this episode, right? Which, by the
Yeah.
way, I thought was a really good scene in itself too. I liked, for the first time, hearing how someone else experienced the bear. We hadn't heard that before.
I liked it, but again, it was relatively inconsequential. Like we saw that in the trailer and felt like it was going to be a consequential moment of, oh, is Sydney thinking about jumping ship?
Right.
And it wasn't.
But I think it's seed planted, right? It's like, hey, we've established something here. Let's see,
Yeah.
and we'll have to see how they. But I think seeds have been planted in interesting ways in these first 5 episodes. There have been moments that haven't worked, but they certainly have the components to land the plane well. As you said, they can land this, but it's been bumpy.
It's been turbulent, yes. Okay, last thing before we let our listeners go watch the rest of the season is you mentioned you have a conspiracy theory?
I feel like we should save this for
Part two.
the second half for the full thing. But you kind of touched on a little bit of it, which is to what level of intention of on purpose is the vibe we've been getting? Are the decisions like they know how to make a good show? Like 2 seasons. Ted Lasso had 1 good season and then fell off. 2 good seasons of The Bear. I think they know what decisions lead to what experience, and it's kind of around this idea of how intentional are some of the bumps that we're experiencing.
Yeah.
Maybe not to give too much credit, but I'm trying to be optimistic here. That and I'll elucidate more once we get to the end.
I'm just gonna say I don't think anybody makes a shitty show on purpose.
Sure, yeah.
And it's been rough, man. The first 5 episodes, I was like almost depressed, and not because like the show left me depressed, just because like I was like, I look forward to this. You know, it's like this is something I look forward to in the calendar year now. And it's kind of like, you know, when the Champions League final rolls around and it's like a 0-0 draw between like Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid, where there's no football happening on the pitch. It's like, yes, you watch the Champions League final, but it was a downer.
Yeah.
And that's why we need money on all games, and we should start incorporating.
Sounds good to me.
All right, buddy. Well, hey, we'll see you later this week for the rest of the recap. Have fun with your rewatch, and good luck getting your backpack back.
I appreciate it all. Actually, it should be sitting outside of your apartment by the time you get there. Fingers crossed. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the rest of the show. Can't wait to talk about the rest.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the LA Food Podcast. Thanks as always to Father Saw for making time to binge The Bear and to share his opinions with us. We'll be back on Friday with the rest of our Bear review and with the rest of the LA Food Podcast. If you're looking for us in the meantime, you can find us on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, even Substack at the LA Countdown. That's THE LACOUNTDOWN. You can also find us on Instagram at LA Food Pod. That's LAFOODPOD. And you can find us at the LACountdown.com.